we might have some differences. I was planning to, and I voted for the amendment the first time it came around, and I ended up voting against it the second time. And I was a yes on the amendment until about 24 hours before the vote. And give credit to our caucus leadership led by Delegate Sullivan, Chairman Sullivan. We probably spent a good 10 or 12 solid hours, maybe more, but 10 or 12 solid as a caucus talking about the ins and outs. And people got a chance to say what was on their hearts and minds. And I listened. I didn't say a word about this until about 24 hours before the vote. And I have never been moved so much by a lot of the arguments. And it got me to think internal, because I was internalizing this with everything else going on. When I first ran for office in 2009, I campaigned on independent and nonpartisan redistricting. I remember distinctly in my general election, I slipped up and I said bipartisan. And I remember Josh Rubner, who was running as a third-party candidate, corrected me and said, no, I support nonpartisan, not bipartisan. And ever since then, that distinction is very important. And at some point, and I had always been promoting One Virginia 2021, I know as others have, for years, because they were an independent organization that was trying to promote nonpartisan, independent redistricting. And at some point, we compromised on those values. And when the Democrats, we put in a bill when we were debating this bill towards the end of the session, we put up a substitute that was true nonpartisan independent districting. And that's what I wanted to vote for. I was convinced by my colleagues and just listening to them that this was more likely to result in a going to the Virginia Supreme Court. And this was not nonpartisan, and it wasn't independent. And if we're going to amend the Constitution, we should get as close to it being right as possible. We had the opportunity to do that with the substitute that put up. I was pleased with Delegate Sullivan and many other Democrats vote for that. That is the true form of what I've campaigned on since 2009. I didn't want to compromise my values in making sure that we had nonpartisan independent districting. I do respect and love and admire people that can look at the same set of facts and come up with a different conclusion, but that's where I landed on it. And it really wasn't until the very end that I changed my vote. And I felt like I was in a place for the past year trying to defend a vote that was really hard for me to grapple with. And I feel much better about my vote now than I had before. And I think it was the right decision.
Mark, let me just follow up on Patrick's point. I would have to say this may have been the hardest vote I've cast since I've been in the General Assembly. And I'll put my nonpartisan redistricting cred up against anybody's. I've been talking about this like Patrick, for years and years, and it's really important to me. But let me just do this from the chair of the caucus's perspective. Patrick's right. We spent hours and hours and hours talking about this, and I do think what people need to realize, if you go and you look at the votes, all 55 Democrats in the House and all 21 Democrats in the Senate voted for redistricting reform. There is no dispute within either caucus that we need to redistrict in 2021 differently than we ever have before. And that Democrats, despite our majority and therefore the ability to draw the lines any way we want, need to cede that power and find some other way to draw the lines that is nonpartisan and much more fair. Every member of both caucuses voted for a bill that would do exactly that, including Patrick and I. I ended up voting against the amendment as well. The math's pretty easy to figure out. There were 46 members of the Democratic caucus in the House that voted against the constitutional amendment and 9 that voted for it. Like Patrick, I've been a proponent of this for a long time and working with One Virginia 2021. It was a very difficult vote, but I do think people need to realize, because there's been some discussion about split within the caucus and obviously there was people voted different ways, but there is no split within the caucus, as far as I'm concerned, as the chairman of the caucus, on the basic question of should we redistrict in 2021 in a nonpartisan way. The answer to that is yes, from every Democrat in the General Assembly. The difference of opinion is how do we go about doing that? Mm-hmm. And to my way of thinking, there was always sort of a plan A and a plan B. Plan A, amend the Constitution. Plan B being to do it with legislation, because people need to realize, we will be in a position, whether the constitutional amendment passes or not, we're going to be in a position in 2021 to be controlling how it is done. The bill, the substitute that Patrick referenced, presented a much more detailed and a much more, in my view, nonpartisan way of doing it. And so the way I was thinking this through is, we've all talked the talk. It's time to walk the walk. I anticipate, and frankly, I know all 55 of my colleagues, at least in the House side, and I'm sure Barbara's caucus is the same. We're prepared to walk the walk, whether it's through the constitutional amendment or whether it's through passing legislation, to do what no other controlling majority caucus in Virginia has ever done, which is to draw lines in a fair, nonpartisan way. And whether we do that because a constitutional amendment passes this fall, or whether we do it through legislation that we are committed to passing, if the constitutional amendment doesn't pass, it's going to be. If I have anything to say about it, and I think I will, and Patrick will have something to say about it, we're going to draw the lines differently than we've ever done it before. We're going to do it in a fair, nonpartisan way. The question is how.
Well, you're going to vote for up or down whatever the independent redistricting commission presents to us is really where we're ending up. I voted for the constitutional amendment, and I also voted for enabling legislation which lays out very detailed guidance on, ensuring minority representation and ensuring that the districts, are physically contiguous. They meet all the DOJ criteria, and more importantly, bring in the culture, attitudes, and perspectives of the districts as they're drawn. So the Senate seemed to lean more heavily towards the constitutional amendment, and I voted for that because I really believed that I wanted something secure in our Constitution. And as you know, the amendment does establish a commission of 16 individuals. 8 would be appointed, evenly divided between the Speaker and the, President of the Senate would be appointing 4 and 4, and then evenly divided within that division proportionally among the 2 major parties. And then 8 retired circuit court judges would appoint 8 experts to the commission. So that's the body that is going to move forward. We expect that this referendum will be before the voters 2020 and on the November 2020 ballot, and that in fact it'll be approved. So I'm explaining the mechanics of it. But at the bottom line is whatever this commission comes up with, they will present it to the General Assembly, and it will be an up or down vote. So lawmakers have removed themselves as best we could from tinkering with an objective draw, if you will, of these different lines. Now, by the Constitution, we can't remove ourselves from making the decision. That clearly rests with the legislative body. But as Rip said, we have removed ourselves from actually, drawing those district lines, which I think is a real transformational kind of thing. If in fact we had I believe if we had districts that were less tilted towards the, in this case, it was sort of the Republican draw. When we had the Medicaid expansion debate, I think we would have been able to pass Medicaid expansion sooner if members were not so concerned about having a primary to their far right because their districts were so lopsided, we're drawn in such a lopsided way. So absolutely, I think this nonpartisan redistricting is a very, very, very transformational thing for Virginia. And I'm really proud that, here the Democrats control the House and the Senate. And we could have done what many other politicians have done generations before us and said, we're in power, we're going to make use of that power, and we're going to, come up with the maps. And we didn't do that. So I was pleased that we honored the values of, accountability and transparency and good government.
Here, I just want to add one thing. I mean, this will be interesting to see how this turns out, because to Senator Favola's point, I mean, this still has to be cleared by the voters in November. And I know that the Arlington Democratic Committee has passed a resolution opposing the amendment. So has Fairfax. And I would anticipate that would translate into a sample ballot. I don't know, but I presume that when Democrats hand out a sample ballot, they will have no scratched in on that question. And with the high turnout that we're going to have, I think there is with that some question of whether or not that this will certainly pass Arlington. My colleagues that opposed it significantly in Norfolk and Hampton Roads, they have assured me that that's going to be what's being handed out in those elections. So I do think it's a question of whether or not I think there's still a question of whether or not it would pass. I don't know.
Hey, Mark, let me take one partisan shot as Maggie's has appeared, and I think our time is about up. But I got to tell you, the irony that filled the chamber, and some might even use the word hypocrisy, as Mark Cole, who had been chairman of the Privileges and Elections Committee for years, got up to lecture the Democrats about the importance of nonpartisan redistricting. And then to hear Jay Leftwich and Jason Miyares, two Republican members, get up and talk about how excited they were to finally be able to vote for nonpartisan redistricting reform. It was all I could do to keep my stomach.
Wow.
It was.
Wow, I'm sorry I missed that.
It's just remarkable that the Republicans had the gall, frankly, to get up and lecture us about the importance of nonpartisan redistricting, because they've been standing in the way of this forever.
Yeah.
They were talking to the 55 of us who, as I said, are united, despite the differences about how to get there, are united on the importance of this issue. This is a Democratic issue, not a Republican issue. And it was. I see Patrick nodding his head. When they got up to give these speeches, the room just filled up with irony and hypocrisy. But what an interesting fall election it's going to be, because every Republican voter out there is going to vote for this amendment. They will. This is now Republican orthodoxy.
Well, and
to be in favor of this amendment.
And I frankly think a fair number of Democrats are going to vote for it too.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Whether it's on the sample ballot or not.
To Patrick's point, that's exactly right. So there's going to be the Republicans are all going to vote for it, and then there's going to be this. Again, I don't like to use words like split, but disagreement. Some Democrats will vote for it, and some won't. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in November.
And I think the ones that, it'll be very interesting.
But again, I think that the